My name is Aljamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board of MORE, which is Moving Omaha for Race Equity. And this is our end of the year kind of wrap up. We were very excited that Dr. Imani agreed to come on. We initially had someone else, and then we said, no, let's go with him because he's going to be able to talk about all these different issues that we're going to cover today. And what we would do in terms of this format, for those of this is your first time, we normally ask the participant, the guest, a number of questions to start it up. Usually about 30 minutes, and about 30 minutes to the show, we stop and we let the participants raise direct questions to our presenter, and he or she will respond accordingly. This is recorded, and again, one of the things we're conscious about, we can have different points of view, and that's what this is all about. We're going to be focused a little bit on race issues. This will be put on our website as well as our Facebook page, and also, if those of you who are joining from Facebook, you can enter questions in the chat, and so we will entertain those also. But I would like to, again, as much participation from the participants as we can in this short time. So without much further ado, let me just start with my quick and fast introduction and get right into the rock and roll of this session. I met Dr. Imani some years ago when I was teaching the Black Studies, and I would tell folks that I presented a paper on the status of Black Studies, and the previous director or chair would not invite me back to be an adjunct. When Dr. Imani came, and he says, oh man, we can't let this talent go to waste, so he brought me back in and let me teach a number of courses for a number of years. And so I was very happy that he was able to let me continue that as an adjunct at the university there in the Black Studies department. Dr. Imani was a previous chair of the department. He also has extensive literature that he's drafted and written over the years. He's been very much involved in many community issues. And by far, he's probably one of the only persons on campus that has a high credibility, not only at the academic institution, but in the community. Again, those of us who are from the community know who's out here doing the work. He's a professor, I said, in Black Studies, and he continues to push those issues, those issues that are related to the African diaspora, as well as he has shared a great deal about religion, spirituality. He's talked at some of our community forums at First United Methodist Church and did an outstanding job. And again, he has, a repertoire of experience in different academic areas. And so we're really excited we can talk about the status of African Americans, particularly at the end of the year. So first, let me say, Dr. Imani, can you share a little bit more about yourself? And then we'll get right into the questions.
Well, I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm a Southerner by nature. I came here, I applied to the job at UNO actually in 2008. And that's especially ironic because it was decided that I was too radical in 2008, and another individual who was hired, and that individual didn't work out.
Right.
So in 2012, I applied for the same job at this time invited, and successfully served for 3 years, and I've been here pretty much ever since.
Good. Well, the first question I have is, we've moved into the new year. We're going to move into the new year, and one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about is how do we address and deal with that issue. And so, in terms of, from your vantage point, what are the 3 most or 5 significant issues that we need to be addressing as people from the African American community or community in general?
Well, I actually ended up with a list of 3 that I thought, there's a whole bunch of issues in our community, but number one is education. And education has always been an issue, the nature of education, who does the educating, what kind of education we have, how's the education going to be funded. I think it's quite clear that the education system, as it's commonly called, is not working. And then, of course, COVID came, and that simply compounded all of the other problems. So one of the issues is, how do we go about getting our young people educated? And I mean, not just skills-based training and competency-based training, but also cultural knowledge. And I'm just as convinced as Carter G. Woodson back was in the 1800s that this system is not going to do that part. Even if they do anything on the skills part, they're not going to do the culture part. The second thing is mental health. And again, mental health is something that has always been a problem and a challenge in the community, of course. And again, COVID and all those factors exacerbated it. We had a bunch of politicians who said mental health is our primary focus, and they claimed that they were going to build something to address that, and nothing happened as usual. There's always talk and nothing happens. But the reality is that the mental health and the mental well-being of African people, which has been under threat from the day we got here, all of the economic and social and political and psychological factors that were already there have kind of had a multiplier effect now. And last but not least, we still have the incarceration and police problem, which is ironic because remember, we began this year with, that was a primary focus and we're going to solve that. We have not solved that. The mass incarceration machine keeps going and the lack of accountability of police keeps going. And so I'd put that one right back on the list from last year. I always think about New Year's. People talk about New Year's resolution, but I've often said that for our community, you can just kind of, rinse and wash the list from last year and bring it on because the same people who were in charge last year didn't do nothing. So you still got the same list.
As you said that, I'm thinking about the state of Black Omahas or even the Black Americans from the Urban League, and you could literally take their reports, dust it off, and the Negroes ain't busted a grape and done nothing in all these years. They just sit around and collect their free welfare checks. And so again, you have the demographics, you have the criteria is an issue, but again, there's no movement on behalf of those folks who hide behind their plexiglass offices all year. Now I'm going to move into a different point. Is about 6 months ago, an elder African-American in our community came up to me and confronted me in a sense and says, what about the conditions of African-Americans? I relate to what we just got to be talking about. He says, we're in bad shape. And he says, looking at our needs in Omaha, Nebraska, is there something wrong with us? Again, I didn't know how to respond because I never had somebody just basically come up and says, we got issues. I did remember later on, I asked my wife about it. She said, yeah, we do got some. But what would you say about that? How do you respond to a question if somebody comes up to you, particularly an African-American who's coming in a decent way and not being judgmental and racist or pejorative, or making some kind of pejorative statement? How would you respond to that question?
Well, I respond to that. Well, let me say first, I give you the plausible deniability. We vaguely know each other, so he has no responsibility for what I'm about to say. But I always protect my brothers, because I know they listening. Check 1, 2. But the reality is that we have a plantation system. See, everybody forgot when there was slavery, and we all know the scourge of slavery and the problems that were associated with slavery and what was done to us, but we forgot that it didn't actually end. The formal slavery system ended, but the institution that I call the plantation pretty much stayed in place. And the reason that happened was because you could have went from slavery, as Africans did in some countries, and they went from slavery to, if you will, to a certain freedom, to entrepreneurship, to community self-development. We had a little bit of that here, but that got crushed. And so what we ended up with was a people, Booker T. Washington talked about it, Garvey talked about it, Elijah Muhammad talked about it. They all had different approaches, but they all agreed that, number one, we had to do institution building. If you don't build any institutions, educational institutions, defense institutions, health institutions, institutions to feed yourself, if you don't do that, then you become reliant on other people to do that for you. And, there's that old phrase, he or she who calls the piper, determines the tune.
Right.
And so if you're paying the piper, then you're going to get the tune. And what we have is, then we had the Negro Dance Coalition. That's what I call them. The Negro Dance Coalition, which we sometimes call leadership. But I always say leadership that ain't got the people following them is just somebody taking a walk, a very confused person taking a walk. So you got the Negro dancers who were dancing to the piper, and the piper was being paid for by white philanthropy. We still got those same 12 nonprofits that I've been talking about since I've been here in 2012 that pretty much control everything that goes on in North Omaha, and everybody can dance around it and whatever. And of course, if they're controlling the money and controlling the property and hiring the people that are going to be running things, then of course you're not going to get much of a solution to your problem. And so we have this plantation structure, and that's what's wrong, because with the plantation structure comes the plantation mentality. If I start an education program, the first thing I'm going to think about if I'm in a plantation mentality is I'm going to look for somebody outside the community to fund it. And then that puts me in a competitive situation with other people in the community, because there's only going to be a couple of us allowed to do it. So then I'm in competition. And so we get in competition, which slave can dance the best. And when you get that kind of thing, and that gets posited as leadership, you're not going to get much in the way of progress. So I think it's not so much that there's something wrong with the masses, but we have not cultivated, we do not have the institutions, and we do not have the leadership accountability so that the needs of the people are directly connected with people who are going to actually carry out those needs, who then help build the institutions that are necessary to make that happen.
You know, as you were saying that, I'm thinking about this other questions. You know, I've watched over the years how these so-called organizations are creeping in codification of watchdog agencies such as Human Rights Relations Department, which is totally useless, been useless for many years in terms of their mission, have no real relationship with the community. We also have some kind of diversity position was created in the city, wrote to their director, Key Station, no response to the letter, wrote to the certain Black folks working in the police department, no response to any of that. And so basically you got the Equal Opportunity Commission in Nebraska that not doing any work. It's obvious they're not doing anything. And you have other people who become more lapdogs for the status quo with no discernible improvements in spite of having Black faces in high places, whether it be the Omaha plantation schools or you got somebody down in Lincoln, whatever. And so my question is, we even have the African American Commission that was created in Nebraska. Again, I ain't heard a peep from them handkerchief heads over there. So my question is, why are these so-called white control or run organizations too incompetent to do their basic mission? Because again, we're spending millions of dollars in the state to improve the life of African Americans and poor people and so on, and these folks are sitting on their hands. So how do we address that, particularly from an African American perspective?
Well, you know, you want to start with the, you know, we could start at the federal level, the Congressional Black Caucus. You know, that's what I've always called it. I said it was just a bunch of people who, you have to understand the purpose of these organizations. See, I'm one of those people, I lower my expectations. If you start a race and you tell me you're going to run and I look down and I see an anvil tied to your foot, I'm not actually expecting much in the way of first place or second place or third place for you. I'm just not. So I guess for me, okay, here's the problem with diversity. Diversity, inclusion, power distribution. We've been taught that those are the same thing, but they are actually three totally different things. Diversity is folks look different. I can have a room where folks look different. Okay, that's the easiest level. Then you have inclusion. Well, maybe I involve some of the folks that look different in whatever's going on. Now, keyword is involved, and I determine their involvement. Then there's something called power redistribution, where I actually deconstruct the power system and give you the power to transform something. A great example is, okay, let's say I want to diversify hiring. Now, diversity would just be hiring different looking folk. That's not a power thing. Or inclusion would be having some people on the selection committee who are different looking folk. We still haven't gotten to the point. The point, though, is that if I give you hiring and firing capability, or I give you the capability of reviewing the hiring processes, the employment processes, changing them, now I've deconstructed power. Now you're going to see some different results. Now, which takes us to, you said, controlled by others. So I don't know about you, but I study history pretty well. And my history tells me I don't remember how many of the slave masters actually empowered the slaves. I don't see a long-standing trend of that. I do remember certain slaves were picked, they were given nice clothes and extra food and stuff and put in charge of the other slaves. They were slaves, they were called overseers and drivers. And I do remember them, and we have our overseers and drivers, but I don't remember the slave master who says, okay, you know what? I'm going to put this other slave in charge of my whole plantation. He can run everything. That's not going to happen. And it didn't happen in colonialism. It didn't happen in apartheid. It's not going to happen. If we want to make change, discernible change for ourselves, we want to create opportunities, we can create jobs, we can create economic opportunities, we can create educational institutions. We can actually do what our people have done historically and did before. But we've got to abandon the rhetoric that creeping around the margins of the master's table is actually a meal.
Right, I got you. Malcolm talks about just because you're sitting at the table don't make you a diner if you're not eating. So he was constantly using that theme to throw back at people. You know, the other thing I'm gonna switch up a little bit. There's been a rash of black on black crime, and I know you've talked about it in the past. You also, I remember you saying you dislike the term as the way it's laid out. Can you explain how, and also how do we address the violence that's going on in our community in spite of all these overfunded nonprofits in North Omaha or South Omaha who are getting money from the government till and they won't bust a grape? So talk to me a little bit about this black on black crime, and then also how can we address violence? Because it's obvious they don't know what they're doing, and we all don't need mental health to deal with violence.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, violence is connected to mental health, is connected to substance abuse, is connected to poverty. Any sociologist could tell you that. And that's true for all people. So my issue with the term is that that's not particular. That's not a black thing. It's a human thing. Take any group of humans, subject them to 400 years of bondage, follow that with another 100 years of second-class citizenship status, give them a leadership that has no economics, no healthcare system, no whatever, and you're going to have some people who are going to become quite hostile and frustrated. And then remember, they don't have much in the way of coping mechanisms, so they're going to be hostile to those around them. And because of residential segregation and apartheid in the U.S., they're going to most likely attack, rob, or take advantage of those closest to them. So that's for me the problem. Now the issue is, there's a difference between a violence revolutionary or an anti-violence revolutionary and a violence activist. And see, we confuse those two things. Here's the problem. If I'm a homeless activist, a violence activist, or whatever activist, take any social problem, make me an activist. How do I make my living? You guessed it. I make my living working on the problem. Do I really want the problem solved? I mean, I might theoretically talk about it, but I don't really want the problem solved, because if I was to solve the problem, then I am out of a job. You do understand that, right? So You're right. We have all these organizations that get funding for working on what's called black on black violence. And they keep working on it, and they'll be working until eternity itself comes to an end, because their legitimacy is based on your problem. Right, so therefore, you have to create a different entity yourself, which is not based on the problem, but on the solutions to the problem.
Right. You know, I've been very critical of the superintendent who, Cheryl Logan, who came in here on a broom. I don't even call it a broomstick, I call it a yardstick. She exploited the position. I don't think she's ever had one community forum in North Omaha with grassroots parents without the handlers or the empowerment network giving the chorus liner, singing the songs to her how great she is. What can we do to stop these fly-by-night folks who come into our community? They get the money. We had a previous director of Health and Human Services, African-American, Courtney Weathers, I think her name. She left town. She was here for 4 years or whatever. Never stepped foot in North Omaha engaging with clients who are in the programs, whatever your program it is. No credibility, but just basically was just a fly-by-night. So my question is, how do we address some of these kind of people who get these lucrative pensions, salaries off the back of the poor of these problems, and then they have nothing to show in return of their stay in Nebraska or Omaha for that matter? How do we deal with that?
Well, I think, well, first of all, I mean, OPS is, we need a separate episode. but what I'll say is that, you know, we are not politically sophisticated. We don't really understand politics. And when I say politics, everybody's going to go Democrat, Republican. That's not what I'm talking about. Shirley Chisholm, Ron Daniels, okay, I'm a product of theirs politically, and I'm an independent. And what they talked about was that we needed to support not a party, not a person, but an agenda. Not the party, the person, the platform. And too often when we have school board elections or we have these other bodies that are controlling bodies, we have other people, quite often from outside our community, who want to tell us, well, forget the agenda, just vote for the party or just vote for the person. And they'll put persons in front of you that aren't going to do anything for you, or they'll put a party that doesn't do anything for you, rather than having that kind of, you know, face-to-face interaction, which has to do with the agenda. Let me see your actual plans. And then there's accountability loop. Because if you show me your actual plans and what you say you're going to do, then I'm going to be following you around with that list. Wait a minute. You didn't do number 4. You didn't do number 5. But if I'm just voting according to this lack of sophistication that we keep doing, then you get, who's going to hold the superintendent accountable? The school board. How does that work? Don't get me started on what's happened with the school board, okay? but that has to do with the fact that we need to start as a community developing an agenda. See, this goes back to that leadership question again. And then that agenda we should go from that agenda to people who represent not a party, not you know, their own personality, their own egos, but I represent the people, and the people are represented by this platform. And this platform is what we want to do with our school system. And if you come in as a superintendent and I'm exercising oversight, you're going to have to speak to that.
Or as I get off the pot, you know, what's unfortunate is I've argued lately that district elections and some of these people we have in high places have done us no good. I mean, you might as well just have people from the Dixiecrats or the people from the Southern Confederacy or daughter of the Confederacies in charge of these school boards, because again, they don't respond to the parents. And I even had Ricky Smith with his asinine self say to me, Ojima, what have you done for the community? I mean, it was almost like absurd. And I told him to get his coloring book out and says, but how can an elected official who has not busted a grape on anything challenge people who've been doing this for years? But anyway, let me leave him alone because he speaks for himself, or he can't speak for himself, because I've heard him talk at school board meetings. It's embarrassing, but I don't want to get any personal things here. Switch up. As an African American, how do you measure success for the African American community or individuals? And the reason I say it is because I look at all these templates and demographics, things are not produced. The Department of Education hide the data. OPS will not produce the data. They got a guy named Scott Smithborn who has research data. He's in charge. He won't release that information except to the Empowerment Network. I have no clue how African American or kids are doing really in the school system. And for the most part, I see stuff on the national level that we're not doing as well. Kids come out with their report cards every year. But at the end of the day, I see no implementation to reverse the paradigm. So how do we measure success as African Americans as contrast to maybe other groups?
I've always measured success on two variables: the increasing capacity for self-governance and a negotiating position. Now, what do I mean by the increasing capacity for self-governance? Meaning we have a greater capacity at the end, when I'm doing the assessment, we have a greater capacity to run that functionality for ourselves, to manage that ourselves, and to keep it going, right? The other part is negotiation. When I have become so important that you can't make a move without me because of my expertise, my economic resources, my whatever, when the negotiating table can't be set up without me sitting there, right? Or some of us from the community sitting there, then those are the two things that I think you measure. And by those measures, help us, Lord Jesus.
Dr. Imani, we're getting down to the last 5 minutes before we switch over to the audience. And I wanted to give you an opportunity, or other comments and things you want to share before we open it up to the questions and other participants. I know we've shared a number of, well, we and I would call it logical. To them, it may be controversial. And again, they can't, as they say, when you get to a certain point in the status of your life, you can say what you need to say, especially if you're not dependent upon the local nonprofit handouts that they give to people, or I call them welfare checks, as it's obvious.
Buyouts, I call them buyouts. I think a corporate
right.
buyout, where when you buy it out, then you sacrifice the interests of the corporation and you get personally paid. I call it the community buyout plan.
Right.
What I would say is, and this, I get in trouble for this, so this is another one of them disclaimers I'm gonna put. Ajamal is not, it has nothing to do with this, but I'm one of those people. We've got to admit something, and I think it's really difficult for us. And here it is. You heard it from me. This is Nikitah Imani saying it. Integration failed. Here we go. Integration failed. Now, desegregation was important. And I give everybody credit for desegregation, getting rid of the legal impediments that existed because of skin color, ethnicity, other things. Integration was something different entirely. And the logic of integration was that in order to succeed in the society, you had to relinquish your community, relinquish your cultural values, relinquish your institution, relinquish your leadership, and plug into someone else's framework. That was counterintuitive, because the entire history of people in the United States is that they built in their own communities, established their own businesses, their own structures, and then they connected with the larger society. They connected with the larger society, having built their own institutions. we truncated that process with integration, and we rushed into everybody else's institutions without the infrastructure ourselves. And because there's this tremendous love rhetoric about integrationism, it doesn't allow us to do the intelligent critique that we need to do, that we need to go back and capture the spirit of self-determination and self-work and self-worth that we had before. And so as a result, we become, as Booker T. Washington alluded one time, beggars in a land of plenty. And not just economic beggars, but psychological, intellectual, social beggars, always trying to figure out how can we get them to. My question is, why don't we? And I think as simple as that is almost a foreign quantity on so many discussions that I find when we move from issue to issue.
Good. Well, Dr. Imani, we're right at that point almost. And so what I'd like to do is open it up to people who've heard us chat about different issues and questions you may have, and put it in the chat, or open your mic and talk directly to Dr. Imani, or make a comment, rebuttal, anything you want to say. It's up to you. So we have probably a number of people here who may want to say something. No, we'll look if you sit it in the chat or if you have any other comments. The cat got our tongue. This is unusual. Usually there's one or two persons who throw out something back after what we had to say. Feedback. You know, the other thing I got to remind people is that when you attack a public official, you're protected by freedom of speech. So you can say your governor's not the smartest person in the room, or I can say, you know, in order to have a conversation with some of the school board members, I have to have a lobotomy in order to hold a conversation with them. I mean, those are protected rights. And again, freedom of speech allows you to attack public and elected officials, whereas in other countries, I know you can't do that in some areas. But part of the thing that we as a group, and particularly as African Americans, we've given a free pass to some of the most incompetent people who are sitting at the head of the table doing nothing. So when I speak about some of these personalities, it's not like I made it up. But anyway, go from there. Feedback. I see somebody's got something in there. It says equity, diversity. Did I miss something? Did you include the word equity in there? Cynthia asked that question.
No, I actually didn't. I think equity is the backdrop of the distribution of power. So I think I use different terminology, because for me, equity in any meaningful sense is going to involve a redistribution of power, whether it's economic power, political power, whatever. So yeah, I didn't use the actual term equity as in the classic DEI. But I try sometimes to move from the DEI rhetoric to operationalizing it. And I say that because so often we say multicultural, diversity, inclusion. How many people are for it? And it's 99.9% all in favor of it. Now, how many people are actually working at redistributing power? And that becomes a much lower percentage. I don't have those numbers, but the numbers drop off considerably. So yeah, equity is certainly an important variable. And I think the beginning of equity or achieving equity has to do with the redistribution of power. And too often it doesn't.
Well, you know, the other example I use is the city of Omaha is 33% or more people of color. And you go into many of these city hall meetings, county board meetings, different places that have meetings, you will rarely see African Americans and other racial groups at the table, and particularly those from the community. And so you got these apartheid situations, and they say diversity, they'll have a cutout, I think, of President Obama in the room and call that diversity. But at the end of the day, they don't know what equity really means, because again, equity means just that. You're going to have some sense of proportionality dealing with the issues. And again, when we practice affirmative action in Nebraska, it's usually in the prison or the juvenile justice system, or all the negative entities versus the other entities that help build up a community. So yeah, equity is a very complex term. The other thing you alluded to was DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I wonder if some of those people are even competent to do the job, because again, how do you measure that when you work in an organization that's predominantly white, and you're the only person who's of color is the equity director? You know what I mean?
Right. I wanted to share, by the way, that, I'm clearly aware of DEI. I actually run the DEI work group for NASA.
Oh, okay.
So, part of my work is for earth scientists and looking at diversity in the student population, getting STEM education, as well as working with NASA personnel and NASA Globe personnel. So I actually do DEI in a formal way as an activity. So I'm well aware, I just want everyone to know I'm well aware of the term equity, but specifically for African Americans, I'm arguing that equity never worked because the people in power never made a commitment to redistribute power. Whereas, for example, I work in NASA, and NASA has worked very aggressively in some of its global functionality to distribute power to different countries, to different constituencies. That's not what's going on in Omaha. That's a very different thing. I should mention, Ajamal, there was, I think there's a hand for someone that, forgive me if I've got it wrong, TRM. Is that a hand? And if so, maybe they wanted to say something.
Go and open up your mic and say directly, talk directly. I can't even see the hands for some reason. Does somebody got their hand up?
I just see a white hand connected with TRM. That may just be an artifact of my screen. So
okay,
I wanted to make sure we didn't leave.
I know you said it was a white head.
Yeah, no, it was. It's a white hand on the black screen. Okay. Honestly,
someone has Ed. Do you want to open up your mic and talk directly to one, or do you want us to read it? Because I really would love to have people talk directly to Dr. Imani, raise it with their voice. We could read it.
Yeah, I'll talk. Ahead. Yeah.
Hi, Ed.
Imani knows me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is just, how do we get people like you both to speak up at school board meetings, get on the selection committee, run for school board, and then the most important thing, and I'm a Native American / Latino, and we've always been trying to get people to parents or caregivers, I call caregivers, to speak up, because that's the only way we're going to make a change.
Good question. Appreciate it. Dr. Martin, you want to respond to that?
Fantastic question. I think there needs to be some prep work. I'm going to call it prep work done. If you have had a door closed in my face for a very, very long time, I'm the kind of person that will sometimes crash through the door and and I'm ready to deal with the consequences of doing that. When you are dealing with the lived experience that so many of our people are dealing with day to day, if they walk up to a door and it doesn't look welcoming, much less if someone says, don't come in, their response is not going to be a very revolutionary response. They're just going to say, you know what, on this list of everything else I got to do, which includes surviving, I'm not finna climb this wall. And that's why you often see there's a wonderful book by John Gaventa, and he talks about the power of quiescence. Like, sometimes when you look at oppressed people, you say, well, you're oppressed because you don't participate in this, that, and the other thing. But the oppressed people, in their work life, their health, their childcare, their whatever, they are trying to manage all of that. And for them, one of the things that, if you look at, it's not an accident that many of our politicians are quite wealthy and quite powerful, because they have the luxury time to do all of those things. Quite often, the people that we think are most qualified in terms of their experiential context are not people who have the resources or the time to get involved in those things. So I think there needs to be a bridge built. And one of the things I said North Omaha and South Omaha, I said this for years, should get together before the next mayor's election, city council, or whatever the particular board is, and should draft work on a joint agenda and commit to the agenda, not to the parties and all the games they play, but to the agenda, and then push these people. And pushing them also means providing economic and other resources. I was on several campaigns with some candidates who I thought were pretty good, but frankly, they had no money. And the reality is that America's a plutocracy. If you can stand up whoever you want to be a candidate, but there's got to be at some level, some economic resources and some constituencies and coalitions built. We can do that work. We can do it collectively, but we need a leadership that's going to do it. I'm happy to work in that direction, and I have. But unfortunately, a lot of people get so caught up in the party game or the personality game. And I just want to mention the recent mayor election. Now, we had a mayor's election. We had at least 2 candidates from the African-American community, and we had a couple others as well. And if you look at the vote totals and you shuffle them around, if there's one candidacy behind an agenda, that candidacy at least gets to the runoff. But you don't get that. Instead, you get a division that has to do with 2 different people, and then you get the division of implicit party affiliation, and those are the things that the system uses to prevent oppressed people from coalescing around things that will generate power.
You know, I respond quickly and say that you couldn't pay me to be on the school board. I mean, you know, I use an expression, there's some people not smart enough to be racist. And when I look at the quality of them over the years of writing letters to them, they don't respond, they don't deal with you. You sit there, they remind you of robots. I mean, it's like an insult. And it's almost like when I was working in county government, they called me in the office and, you know, my supervisor and a couple of county commissioners and some community person said, you can't use the word racism and you can't use the word white fragility. How do you bring somebody in to clean up a cesspool or a hornet's nest or a viper's pit and tell them they can't use the tool of the workplace? And so again, when you look at these entities are not welcome into the community. They have their meetings in these little plexiglass offices. It's hard to, you don't put their stuff on the website. So I really would not even legitimize the school board and the system because it has never and it never will educate people of color to a decent level unless you involve those parents and those people who have been successful. Last point. We have people who've gotten off of ADC or welfare or TANF or whatever. How often do we ask them how they got off and how do we use and elevate and promote them up and let them help bring other people to how they were able to achieve? We don't do that. So again, people don't want to go in places where they're going to have a hostile environment where the people wearing white sheets and have pumps and different things. I don't have the time for it. Life is too short to waste your time with people who are not serious about some of the issues we're talking about. Other questions, other feedback, somebody else. It says Professor Imani. Oh, there's 2 and 3 of them here. She was at a I was at a skilled care center. The movie some are watching was Hidden Figures. As you know, the story about a team of female African Americans, math wizard, serving in NASA. You want to say anything about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, they have thanks to Hidden Figures, not just the movie, but some of the writing that had been done behind that. NASA radically changed the way in which it recognized many of the excluded people. And this is indigenous people, this is women and whatever. I don't know if you know, but NASA named one of its major facilities after one of the characters or women scientists who were involved in the Hidden Figures project. And they have really taken that. And that's an example. I think NASA is a success story. That's why I stay involved with them, is that they have really, taken the opportunity when their response when you said, hey, you haven't been talking about these people, hey, you haven't included these people, was to radically reorient the systems and the institutions and all the processes in such a way. And they brought me in to help them do it in a way that is now trying to redress those incongruities that existed before. And that, so this can be done. But again, it requires people at the higher levels who are committed to it as a character issue, not just because, oh gosh, this is a feel-good kind of moment, the post-George Floyd. It's got to be deeper than that, because George Floyd, at some point, everybody's going to forget about that. We have to make a commitment to making diversity, inclusion, equity, all these terms that we use, part and parcel of what we do, our modus operandi. One of the things I said at the university in my capacity there was, I said, well, if you wanted a new stadium or you wanted something for the football team, they just, they've been dealing with football issues, just hired a new coach. And what did they do? They put tremendous resources behind the leadership, and they put tremendous resources around player personnel and player development. But sometimes when we get ready for DEI and you say, okay, where are the resources, the human resources, the economic resources, that because you got this big commitment to this, and all of a sudden it's like, a dollar change and a bake sale.
Other feedback, other questions. We got about 15, 20 minutes more. Other feedback, other people reaction, comments, questions. We don't all have to agree. One thing that hit me as you were talking, Dr. Imani, is the really lack of inclusion. And you were talking about NASA. Are there people who utilize your skill set locally? I know sometimes you get treated much better when you leave the state or you go and you're right here. Have any of these local yokels or these folks who so-called believe in diversity tapped in some of your resources of people like you in our community that you're aware of?
When I came here in 2012, the university was on a huge campaign for diversity, DEI, and they were hiring officials and whatever. I sat on maybe 6 different bodies over an 8-year period. And again, there was a lot of commitment to what I call physical diversity, but the redistribution of power was not really happening. And I think, you know, the university still has a long way to go in that regard. And the university in many ways has been a bellwether for a lot of institutions that I've worked with. So some people want you to come in, they'll let you come in, they'll let you make a speech or whatever. But when you start talking about how they should change their SOPs, their standard operating processes, and their recruitment techniques and all this kind of stuff, then that's when they're like, well, we're really glad you came out to see us.
Other feedback. By the way, I saw that Metro wants to provide some kind of a course that deals with diversity or training so people can be DEI, better DEI people. But when I looked at who they had leading it up, I'm like, oh no, it can't even succeed because you got people who have no skill set and being advocates or knowing what the concept of racism, white fragility, all the kind of basic terms are used. They don't have the cognitive process of the mental capacity to do that work, nor have they done it. So it's hard for me to be a track star if I don't know how to run or something of that nature. So again, we sometimes go to the wrong people with the right questions and they can't do the job. It's obvious and they haven't done it. So it's gonna be interesting. Other feedback.
There's a comment in the chat, Jamal.
Okay, what does the pipeline look like for our youth to understanding these issues and being champions of it and unapologetic about their identity, which is a very powerful question. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a product of, I came out of the Junior Panthers, and I was a product out of the idea that the majority of the young people in the community are going to go into public education, but there was an acknowledgement that public education was not going to teach you collective identity and kind of a collective orientation. And so the Panthers responded to that by having Saturday classes. I really think in Omaha, having youth programs and other things external to, you know, in addition to perhaps the formal educational systems that deal with, you know, who you are and where you come from and why it's important that you take a communal role. I think there's a lot that could be done there by a lot of different organizations. Now, it won't be done by these nonprofits because they are specifically charged with staying away from that kind of stuff. So it would be something very, very different. You know, if you think about it for a minute, you look at an organization like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, they were created by Eurocentrists to promote Eurocentric values for their youth. And you know, you could look at them as a success story. The Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts become really an international organization for the development of youth with a narrow set of cultural and social values. My notion is that's what every people have done, is that they have always created organizations. We had organizations, they were called rites of passage. And at a certain age, young men and young women would come under the tutelage of older men and older women who had cultural values and who had activist experience and so forth. And we kind of kept that mentorship for a long time. But again, I have to go back to kind of integrationism, where the shift was from community-based stuff to external stuff, to the government, to social service agencies, to external parties. And we've not really recovered the reconstruction and the rearticulation of those kinds of institutions.
Dr. Mike, there's another question that just jumped out as you were talking. There are a number of people who nationally do some very nice academic work, research, data, you know, you name it, and particularly race-based. I don't see a lot of that coming out of Nebraska, whether it be the medical center, the law university colleges, UNO in general. Criminal justice doesn't do a lot of race data information. Why is race such a difficult issue for academicians to address? And I know you in the center of the hornet's nest or the viper's pit, and I see stuff on Facebook and you make a comment, they take it off if they don't promote their agenda. But why is it so hard to do that when you got such a plethora of information in the city that is a perfect microcosm of the United States in terms of racial makeup? Why is it?
Well, there was something called the Progressive Research Institute. I did a little historical research on that, and they were doing a lot of things back in you know, kind of historical time in the region. But the issue is that when the educational institutions of the community are themselves implicated in any kind of racial critique, then they're not going to be the locus of where the research really is going to come in a substantial way to change it. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is waiting for the police research team assembled by the chief to come out with the report on police brutality. That report is going to be delayed. If you ever see it, it's going to be, you ever seen those CIA reports from the 60s? They're heavily redacted.
Right.
Like
right.
you can't see who or where. And so my sense is that the hesitation is not that the data isn't available or that you don't have scholars who can do this work, and some do. But the difficulty on the local level is, does the state, do the local institutions, do the institutions that are in many ways the subject of this data, are they inclined to support it, to support both the research as well as publishing it, as well as publicizing it? I don't think we want to publicize, for example, what's going on with OPS with the elite schools versus the community schools. I don't think, if you're inside that structure and your legitimacy is based on that structure, that data is available. But what I've seen of it tells me that you are not likely to see a big, you know, kind of machine gun blast of that information. And I think that's true in so many other areas as well. And
sorry, what I was going to say is,
no, go ahead.
The learning community gave $3 million to the Buffett Institute, Early Childhood, to do racism training or whatever. I ain't heard a peep from them. The learning community's been around for, I'm going to say, at least, 10, 15 years. I don't know what they've done to help us learn, or if they've narrowed the gap, because you don't see any data to show that. Again, they may work with certain personalities, but at the end of the day, it's almost like a waste of taxpayers' money what we spend on the learning community. You look at the Buffett Institute, you know, you haven't seen the transformation in the community from those families. I don't even hear people who in those programs brag about them. So part of what you're alluding to is that the very institutions that we empower to do stuff, they are going to just sit around and collect their welfare checks, and I'll call it their social service checks, and really our numbers haven't improved. And again, we don't have some of the very advocates to do that. But let me let other people make comments here. Again, it's about the community and other people making comments here. Other feedback. Dr. How many years you been out of UNO? How many years has it been for you now?
I have completed my 10th year, so I'm starting year 11.
Okay, good. I'm surprised you survived the 5 year long in Omaha. It's been rough.
Okay, on another episode, we can talk about my UNO experience.
Okay,
you know, that is a whole. There's no way we could fit that into an hour. In fact, I think that needs to be like a mini series. Like, you know, they used to have those mini series where they lock your TV down for like 5 days. You know, I remember the character. There was a character in Living Color, and his shtick was always doing this thing where he would put his hands on his face and go tragedy. So that's what I call it. And I'd have that be the opening scene, tragedy. You know, it's been a it's been a, I won't say it's uncharacteristic. When you stand up for, you know, marginalized people in the United States, you understand what you're getting yourself into. And when you do it at a majority institution, you understand what that means. And you basically keep your bags packed and your quiver full of arrows.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. You know, what's even funny is that the fact is that we got people doing, I call it a hamster treadmill. They do that same walk every day and nothing comes out of it, and they continue to get promoted. And again, it reminds me of the mayor and this mentality of a trolley car to the University Medical Center, and yet we can't get our trash picked up in 3 days. And we actually gave this trash company $10 million over the bid process. So you wonder, okay, again, it's cold outside, but give me more feedback on, you know, again, a mayor who lives in, I think she lives out of town a lot these days. And so it's kind of unfortunate who's running the ship down there, you know? Crazy.
No, I really believe with the mayoral election, a coalition between North and South Omaha would be effective at making some major changes in that direction. I'm going to say it again. I've been saying it for 10 years and people nod their heads and they say, yeah, you're right. And then nothing happens. So I'm just going to put it out there in the universe. Like they say, put it out there in the universe again, that if North Omaha and South Omaha could coalesce, just those two regions, I mean, it'd be great to have everybody, but just those two regions truly coalesce around an agenda for the city in terms of development, education, basic services, so forth, and then find some people who could push that agenda at the city council level and the mayoral level. They have the numbers, if you can get the voting drive, to really make some changes there. But unfortunately, we get the party and personality thing, and I just think that is just so corrosive. You know, elites can play that game; they can afford it. People that are marginalized cannot afford to play the party personality game.
Right. We're down to about 7 minutes, but I was going to throw this out. Years ago, when Mayor Harold Washington was running for it and became the mayor, a professor of mine at UNO, education professor who lived in Chicago, said it could have happened a long time ago had the coalition come together, because again, people were like elated and happy that you got a black mayor. He said it should have happened a long time ago in Chicago, because of the coalitions with infighting and so on. And I think one of the issues we got to figure out is how to deal with conflict resolution, and how we start to do, as you just alluded to, bringing the brown, black, and progressive whites and folks, Native Americans and Asians into the same room to deal with the common agenda, so that we don't have this kind of elite structure. We're down to, I wanted to throw a question out. What do you think we can do for 2023 to change the paradigm? I know you alluded to it earlier, but are there specific things that we as a community got to do if we want to make 2023 better than 2022 from your vantage point? What's your magic wand, in other words?
I think it starts with community communication. I know that Noise, this organization Noise, was trying to put together, and they're trying to raise kind of consciousness in the community. A lot of the masses of our people don't know certain things are going on. Sometimes the building has been closed and moved and sold before we're even aware that it was up for sale. I mean, we're sometimes very reactive, and that's because the leaders that are designated for us are not giving us the information. So we almost need to be very subversive, if you will. We need to have underground press. Think of those countries like China and Russia, where the government has control over the media. Everyone in those countries knows to have underground presses and underground. They would never look at a TV newscast, local newscast, and actually think that's what's going on. Unfortunately, in Omaha, that's kind of what we're stuck with. So I think we need an underground kind of journalistic / academic core that is going to dig up the hidden stories and put them out there and raise the consciousness of the people. The other side of that is, I think we need to work on what I call effective participation. Everybody can't go to a school board meeting, but you can design ways in which even those who cannot physically go can be present. And I've spent a lot of time talking about effective participation. We sometimes have a systemic orientation to participation. If you don't come to the city council meeting, that means you can't be involved with the city council. No, there are hundreds of other ways to be involved with the city council and to get your voice heard, even if you cannot physically, for whatever reason, get to the actual meeting one particular night. And I think we need to get a lot more creative with the whole concept of political participation. Effective. I use that term, effective participation.
Well, now that we have COVID-19 and people doing Zoom and Facebook Live, you would think these entities would make their stuff available that way. And particularly some of them having their meetings at 9 o'clock in the morning when working class people, or 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the case of city council or county commission, who can't go to it. But again, there needs to be a better way for them to communicate. And they probably need to hire people who are community engagement folks to help get the word out, so they're more active and so they don't become cynical. And again, I didn't understand why people become anarchists looking at some of the local governments and so on. But yeah, we got to do that. And again, also when you write letters or you communicate, many of these public and elected officials don't even respond. So people get frustrated. Dr. Imani, we're down to the last minute or so, and we're going to have evaluation folks fill that out. Any last closing comments for our participants or our viewing audience?
Yeah, just one. I wanted to say to Ed Ventura, who wrote in the chat, need to get youth involved, and I think that's really true. We have to be very creative at reaching today's youth, especially with social media and other things. In terms of the Omaha Star, I'll say that the Star is uniquely challenged in that it sits at the crossroads between the community and some very powerful white philanthropists, and that affects its journalism. And I'm hoping that Noise and other journalistic entities can play a major role in kind of pushing the Star into the kind of engagement I think it could be involved in. So it certainly could be involved, but there are the matter of the Star is a bit more complex than it looks to outsiders.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Imani, really appreciate you being on the show today. And for the viewing audience, we'd like for you to fill out the evaluation form. We're coming up on the end of the year, and we obviously wish you a happy new year. We hope that we can bring some different programs and different people to the table to bring what we call grassroots or grass tops engagement and real honest, truthful dialogue instead of the rehearsed canned speeches that come out of many of these so-called public officials who really not doing things for the people. Again, we got to bring more people to the circle, and particularly those who traditionally don't participate in these activities. More will be involved in a number of these things. We're going to do some virtual meetings as well as some on-site location meetings coming up in 2023. And of course, we're going to have we call a Southern African Project. We're going to have that as one of our mainstays, also bringing people from across the continent on Africa, particularly Southern Africa, to conversations with African Americans and other people of goodwill in this country to talk about some of the similarities between apartheid South Africa and the apartheid or segregation that we had in this country, or still have for that matter. So that'll be one of the big things that we'll bring forward to our viewing audience as we go forward. Any other last things we want to go? We got about 1 minute left. Anything else from anyone to throw anything out? And we don't have our next event locked in yet, so I can't allude to our next event, but we are trying to get a couple of authors. There's a woman who wrote a book on white women and having dinners and so on, so we may invite them on to talk about their book. And we also want to bring some book discussions because I don't think we have enough people who read books and can discern them and discuss them and figure out how do you really make sense of achieving some of the objectives of these books that deals with self-help and particularly helping people who are marginalized. So we hope that you will join us more so in 2023 and support more moving Omaha for race equity, because we are not aware of any organization that uses racism within their mission statement. And so that makes us uniquely different from a lot of the so-called organizations that deal with these issues. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank the participants, and Dr. Imani, obviously, thank you for coming at the end of the year and throwing out some heavy light. And as we always say, if you don't have your sunglasses on, you might get retina damage, but we really appreciate you being here today. And as we always end, may the force be with you, and Baroko.